All right. So if we take a look at today's schedule, we are week 3, right? January 18th. So what we're going to talk about today and the exercise that we're going to do is we are going to lay out a standard page, right? Now that you have created a page for yourself, that all that I was expecting for that to be marked off was you've got your page and you've got text in there. You got an H1, you got a H2, you got a couple of H3s, you got paragraph tags, you have your ordered list, you have your bulleted list, you have a text link, maybe you did something in italic, etc. Now, if you look at the written exercise from last week, there was stuff that we didn't get to, but a couple of things that we didn't get to were, well, we're going to talk about them today anyway. Things like properties in CSS, like width, margins, etc., borders. And every time in the past that we have then given elements like a paragraph tag, a width, and margins, etc., we've just then needed them in this exercise. So I thought to myself, hey, great, we didn't get to them last week, but we'll get to those principles today. However, one of the things that we did not get to last week that I want to start off with is under the Anatomy of CSS lecture. The concept of classes and IDs. Okay, so when we were talking about JavaScript, for instance, if I were to go to the final project, if you will, here for our website that we'll be doing, we have this slideshow that if we use the inspector, right, or if we look at the view page source, we'll talk about this later on. It uses the document object model to go find dot flex slider. Okay, so the dot says go find the element with the class of flex slider and use that to perform the map with. So if we scroll down here through the code, we will see that this div element right here has a class of flex slider. This UL has a class of slides, etc. But then you'll notice that here in all the major elements, like my header element, my navigation element, my content element, etc., I am using IDs instead of classes. Okay, so the way we can label elements to then find them through the document object model, with JavaScript, you can JavaScript has a method called get element by ID or get element by class name or get element by tag name. So we could say get all elements, get all anchor tag elements, or get all list item elements, or that kind of stuff. So it's a way of labeling these elements for use in JavaScript and or style sheets primarily. Okay, I'm sure that the Google machine also does use them for search engine optimization and figuring out what element is which. But nonetheless, IDs and then classes. So the next kind of question that I'm imagining you guys asking me is, well, what's the difference between an ID and a class? Okay, the theory goes that an ID you use once per page and once per page only. Okay, so for instance, when I'm calling out my main division elements, so div tag stands for division tag. So when I'm calling out my major elements of the page, for instance, if we go to this prototype of mine, now there's a grid in this prototype that you're not seeing if you're here in the classroom because the contrast of the projector screen is so contrasted you don't see the grid. But what you can see here is this space up here, which is the header element, this space right here, which is the navigation element. Then I will have, a lot of times I call the next one down middle. Sometimes I call it content. Sometimes I use different labeling. We then down here at the bottom have another element that this one could be labeled footer navigation. This one be labeled footer, so on and so forth. So those elements then are once per page, for instance. Now, let's say if we look at then the inspector palette for this page, there's my header element. Here is my main menu element. There is my middle. So actually, let me bring this over a little bit. My middle element, if we scroll down, I have an ID for menu footer, footer menu, then I have an ID for footer. If we look at then just these images right here, that image has a class, attachment thumbnail, size thumbnail, WP post image. So those classes are generated by WordPress, but that's kind of regardless of the matter. What is happening is I have a repeating element on the page. For instance, let's say if I hover over this one, article, class, post box. Now I also do have IDs in here, post box number, post box number, post box number. But if I ever have repeating elements on a page that then I need to style with the same style, like blog posting elements like that, I would use classes, okay? So classes then are elements that you would call out multiple times on a page. So I use those very distinctly in terms of my main elements and then repeating elements, whatever they are. You will find people that will argue with me. I'm going to make no bones about it. You will find people that say, oh, you should never use IDs. And every time they explain to me why you should never use IDs and why you should only use classes, I never, to be honest with you, I never fully comprehend what they're saying as why, like they don't convince me, okay? But just so you know, you might hear, so if you leave this class, right, and you hear somebody say, oh, you should never use IDs, you know, there is an argument out there to be made. And when somebody rationalizes it on like points and stuff like that, what they're saying, I believe them, but it doesn't convince me that I should not call out my major elements with IDs. Let's just get that off our chest, or off my chest. So if we then go back to the anatomy of CSS lecture, again, classes and IDs. For instance, I can put a class in a p tag that says red text. I can then give it a declaration to give it red text. So if you want to follow along with me on that, that is something that you guys can do along with me here. So if I go down to my elements on the page, and if I chose, I don't know, that p tag, and I said class equals red text. And then let's say I went to this one list item here, and I said class equals red text. And I saved that. And if and when it's saved and put it up to my site, and I refresh, nothing happened, right? Because I've just given it a label. Again, if I inspect, this paragraph tag has a tag of red, has a class of red text, but I don't have any declaration of what red text is, okay? So I would want to then, in my style sheets, use the dot or the period as a signifier. Red text, braces, color, red. And now anything that has a class of red text, if it has text in it, it's going to be red. So if we go back, I know it's like rocket science, isn't it? So now this paragraph tag and that list item are red. But what if we want to say, notice that I gave the same class here to both the p tag and the list item. Okay, well, I could then further say in my style sheets, well, paragraph tags with red text are I don't know what's a good secondary one. Border, bottom. Stuff is not auto-completing for me. Border bottom. 1 pixel, solid, red. Now, only the paragraph tag and not the list item, because I said only paragraph tags that have a class of red text. So right here and right here, does anybody remember the kind of definition of what those are? What types of selectors are those? Contextual. Don't make me start quizzing you guys. Right. Contextual selectors. So just like this has multiple selectors, we can do contextual selectors to say all the classes of red text that are only in the p tags, or all the m tags that are only in paragraph tags. Make sense? Those look stupid, so I am going to comment those out, but leave them in my code. So we haven't gotten to comments yet. So what I'm doing here is commenting out CSS. So programmers, you two, guys. You guys are my default programmers in the group, okay? Have you come across this style of a comment in the past? Okay, this typically is a comment for multi-line comments. Okay, so if we in JavaScript did a comment that started with those two characters, that's a single line comment. Okay, so in our CSS file, the style of commenting something out is /**//. Okay, and when it's commented out, that means that either I'm making a comment to signify, hey, this is a section, I'm writing notes to myself, whatever, writing love letters to somebody who knows, whatever you want to do. But if I comment something out like that, then it's not going to, did I say that? I did not. Side note, see that little star up there on my screen? If you can't, that little star up there means that's not saved. Save it, star is gone. I come here, and if I refresh, then that's back to normal, okay? In the HTML copy, comments start out with a caret, exclamation point, 2 dashes, and then everything turns gray. I'm going to throw in a comment there and then end it, begin header. Okay. I am going to throw in another comment there, prematurely, I might add, but nonetheless, end header. Right? So this is a way right here. So you programmers, again, have you ever looked at somebody's code and you have absolutely no idea where to start, what's going on? Right? It's terrible. So what I typically do, let's go to something that I was writing over the weekend. Comments are gold, right? So for instance, if anybody ever got a hold of this function file right here, and they went to look at this function that I've been writing, add flex slider gallery using function or short code, they may read this right here and say, oh, wow, this guy's got a bad attitude. But they can also start looking at these. So these are single line comments with the //. What's going on here? Check for images on attached postings. Create opening markup. Create the list item. For the slider on the home page, for the slider everywhere else, so on and so forth. So a lot of times this looks right here like, oh, wow, that's a lot of directions. That's a lot of comments. But I'm doing it on purpose because as an instructor, if I'm ever showing this code off to my student body or to my students, I want them to really be able to read step by step what's going on. So same thing in our HTML, right? You can see right here, this is JavaScript right here. I'm not commenting something out. In other words, if I have, like I just wrote in here, anything that's between those two opening and closing comments will not be read as legitimate instructions. In other words, the browser will get to that and say, ignore that, it's commented out. So anytime you are doing work and you don't want to delete something because you don't know, right? You don't want to delete something and then figure out that, oh, that wasn't the problem, I have to write that back in there. You might want to just comment something out like that, okay? So we got to that part in last year when we were here and we were commenting stuff out that we wrote last week that we didn't write last week because we didn't get to it, but there's that concept. So in terms of then somebody looking through your HTML, then I'm a real fan of all my major division elements. I will start out by saying begin that element and end that element. You'll see different styles of how people use the comment tags, right? But this, like I said, I'm a fan of using div tags for these major elements instead of, I'll show you some of the HTML5 tags. There is a header tag, there is a footer tag, there is a main tag, there is an article and an aside tag. I tend not to use them a whole lot because I started off with the division tags, and semantically, right, I'm still calling these elements out by their proper names. In other words, in the Google machine, a Google machine will look for a header tag for a certain purpose, but it will also recognize this as the header because I've said ID header. Does that make any sense? So to the Google machine, a header tag, an ID header, or class of header are the same thing, as far as I know, okay? But what I did state last week is if you have a bunch of ending div tags, especially if you have an opening div tag, another opening div tag, another opening div tag, in other words, you have nested elements, right? So look here, if I didn't say end widgets here and end content there, you might play the game of what does that closing div tag go to, right? You can see that that might be a problem, okay, down the road. So how I get around that is, and again, I have my style of writing code. I'm teaching you my style of writing code. It is a style of writing code. It is by no means the end all be all. Everybody, have you guys ever worked out there in programming shops? Yeah, everybody has their own style to some degree. There are those standards like, oh, no, it's not a tab, it's 4 spaces, right? Have you come across that? Yeah, okay. Well, who gives a, you know what I mean? I use a tab. Is anybody gonna, I mean, are the tab police gonna come after me, right? But there are different styles of coding, okay? So what we're gonna do then here is, now that we have discussed classes versus IDs, the next thing that we wanna do, and again, I'm really sorry about the projector. If you want to look at this example on your own computer, just go to myfacultywashington.edu. And like I said, the example that I'm looking at is the page layout for your web page, right? Because nobody sees the pink lines in there up on the projector. You can barely see, which is kind of a shame, okay? But here is where we are going to start to break our page out into a header section, a navigation or menu section, a content area that then has one column and then another column, and a footer. Okay, we're not going to get to all this week, but we're going to then go into the menu next week and wrap it up next week. But first thing I want to do is I want to put this grid background. If you're watching this on video, you'll see the grid background. Do all of you guys have this open on your screen? Okay, good. Again, sorry about the projector. I looked on here to see if I could adjust it, and I can't. So how many of you have ever used grids in any kind of design work at all? Okay, so have you done magazine layout or poster layout and have used column grids?
Yeah, actually I'm using them more now when I do wireframe stuff, so the right border.
Correct, absolutely, okay. So if you're doing wireframe type stuff, right, this essentially is a wireframe. So let's say I was doing a paper wireframe in Illustrator. Okay, so clients premium. If I were to then go look at these wireframe documents for Jet City Improv, up here, can you see it or is it too light? It's really light on the projector. Let's see if I can boost it up a little bit. You can kind of see them up top there, right? These are then my grid markers, so that when I am making elements on the page, right, especially if I have columns, or if I have something, we can even just look at my own website, right? If you see up top on my website, not on the projector, but if you're on my website, you'll see the grid up top there, okay? Let's say we go to the videos page, right? Well, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 across, okay? I have 20 pixels of margin space here. I have 20 pixels of gutter space here. I have 20 pixels of gutter space there, and there, and there, and then this column right here is 300 pixels across, okay? So each one of these thumbnails is 60 plus 20 plus 60, 140 pixels across, okay? So the grid system that I'm using, that I still use, that we're going to use in this class, is the 960 grid system. So if we view the demo here, you can kind of see the pink lines in it, right, on the projector. But this is where I get all the measurements for all the elements. So the one that I most commonly am using, not most commonly am using, but if I have a content area in my website here, and then I have a sidebar over here, right? Then in the 960 grid, I am using 620 pixels for the content area and 300 pixels for the sidebar area. So why 12 columns? Why not 15? Why not 13? Why 12? I'll say it like this. Ratios is a good answer, okay? You can divide 12 by 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6. So and 12. So if you want 12 elements across, you're going to have 12 elements across that are 60 pixels each. If you then want 6 elements across, you're going to have 6 elements that are 140 pixels apiece. Does that make sense? Okay, so we're going to use the 960 grid. Now, a word about the 960 grid. If you're looking at my website, up here for the grids, I can highlight that. Come on, highlight that number. Well, it says up there 980. Okay, it's still the 960 grid, but here's why I say 980 versus 960. These columns are 60 pixels each. They have a gutter in between 20 pixels, right? 60 times 12, whatever that is. 11 times 20, whatever that is. Comes out to 940. Then if you add 10 pixels on the left and 10 pixels on the right, that equals 960. Well, 10 pixels on the left and right, to me, not enough, right? So instead of using 10 left and right, I use 20 left and right, 940, 960, 980, okay? But it's still called the 960 grid. So if anybody asks you, what grid are you using? Tell them the 960, 12. Okay? So there are other grids out there, especially now that monitors are up to, I don't know, 5 million pixels wide now. That's an approximation, right? What's the biggest viewport these days? 1920 pixels across, right? So a lot of people, instead of stopping at 980, which why I still use the 980 marker is because it's below 1024, right? The lowest common denominator for monitor resolution. Some people push out to 1200. Instead of making these 60 pixel gutters or 60 pixel columns, they make them into 80 pixel columns, right? You could go another step, make them into 100 pixel columns, whatever, right? The nice thing about the 960 grid or keeping it like this is look at all the math, look at all the numbers, really nice round numbers that are easy to deal with, especially then when you need to start converting stuff into responsive design, right, for percentages and that kind of stuff. Okay, so the first item of business is then we need to put that grid into our web page. In other words, I have a plugin extension that turns the tabs off because in Chrome you'll notice things slowing down, right? We need to talk about using images. All right. Creating and saving images. Well, how many of you have used Photoshop? Just about everybody, right? What 12-year-old kid doesn't know how to use Photoshop these days, right? Pretty much. So if we're in Photoshop and we are then going to save, now the file saved for web is now legacy, but if I have Photoshop opened, right, here I have boosted up the contrast on the 12-column grid thing that I'm going to put as the background image in my page, so we'll see it on the projector. But this right now is, the file is bg-960.png. Okay, so there are, coming out of Photoshop, 3 major file formats that you can use within your web page that a web browser will understand and render. Okay? GIF. Yes. Good. It's not giraffic. Okay? You've all seen the memes on the internet. Don't make me angry, right? Graphics interchange format, not giraffics interchange format. So unfortunately, GIFs are limited to an 8-bit color palette or 256 colors. This makes GIF format suitable for storing graphics with relatively few colors and kind of a low file size. Let's just say it like this. We've moved on from GIFs these days, right? Browsers are sophisticated enough, connections are speedy enough that we can then go up to the next one, PNG. Well, let's go skip down one, PNG. PNGs are the file formats that I use most often for just graphics on the web when I am saving photos or logos or that kind of thing, okay? PNGs, portable network graphics, file format was created free open source, blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. The thing that you need to know about PNGs is there are 2 sizes of PNGs, 8-bit and 24-bit, okay? So 8-bit, well, you can save things at 256 colors, like a GIF file, or 24-bit, where you can save things with millions, 16 million colors. Another file format is JPEG, Joint Photographers Expert Group. JPEGs were popularized by photographers. How many of you have seen JPEG formats when you have taken stuff on your cameras and downloaded them and opened them up in Photoshop, right? That is a common format. So if you are putting photos into your website, right, JPEGs probably are the best for that. If you're using graphics, like background graphics, typography, in other words, if you are needing to do stuff like this, like feature a logo in your portfolio, PNG file is probably the better way to go than a JPEG, because a PNG file will render the contrast of these curves a little bit better. That's what I've noticed, right? We're just about to get to that. There is now a new supported file type. Not new, an old supported file type. SVGs. So what are SVGs? Well, if I'm in Illustrator, and as that's opening, let me show you an example of an SVG. This up here is an SVG. Okay, so basically what an SVG actually is it stems from a vector graphic. So SVG stands for Scalable Vector Graphic. Okay, so if you're using something in Illustrator, right, like a logo, like an icon, now saving it as an SVG is popular to do so because, what do you think I'm going to blame it on? Just take a guess. What? No. Did I totally spell that right? Let's see if this is the one. Yeah, this is the chart. Wow, this is loading really, really slow. IE. Joel. Internet Explorer didn't start supporting SVGs until IE9. Okay, so while IE8 was still popular, right, we couldn't support SVGs. Right now that SVGs are supported, I haven't changed everything over yet. In other words, on my to-do list is take my header graphic up there. That is a PNG file that has actually, what I'm going to do instead of having those as PNG files is I'm going to make those boxes with a red background, a box with a red background, and those crop marks, borders on elements, and then get to where I'm going to save my logo as an SVG here pretty soon, right? Again, why does the cobbler's kids have no shoes? Well, but what I can tell you is that using an SVG, right? For instance, if I am in Illustrator and I open up then this file here, my flame icon, I can then save as, and I should be able to save it as, can you see that? Yeah, save that as an SVG file and then use it in my web page just like any other image file. Okay, so, but the good thing about an SVG then is it's still vector. So what's the magic behind an SVG? Here's the magic behind an SVG. If we view the page source for this, an SVG is actually converted and rendered in code. I want to say that's XML, but I'm not 100% positive, right? Might be HTML5 with the tags. Path, I'd have to look up those tags and see, you know, path rectangular coordinates, etc. So those numbers in there are rendering all the curves and all the points, right? So if we are in Illustrator, and how many of you have used Illustrator before, right? So if you've used Illustrator, then if we zoom in on this and take a look at these, right, we have our points and our paths and our curves and that kind of stuff. So basically what Illustrator is doing is converting that vector math into code that then a browser will render, right? So it's kind of the, I'll just say it like this, for vector graphics, logos and that kind of stuff, I'm starting to use SVGs, right? But for pixelated artwork, photos and the like, or even if I'm looking at something like this, that is, you know, these were Illustrator files that then I brought into Photoshop and kind of placed them, gave them a little, I mean, I might have placed them all in Illustrator, right? I can't remember, but why I couldn't say this is an SVG, I believe, I haven't tested it yet, is because of the rasterized photographic images. Again, that's still on my to-do test list, right? But still, for that kind of stuff, I would save things as a PNG. Make sense? Okay. So what we're going to do then is, for starters then, we need to create an image folder in your file folder system, okay? So in other words, we are going to today place two different files. We are going to place a background image, the grid background image, so you can, when you're working on stuff, see how things look in space according to the grid. And then everybody needs a photo of yourself. Go to Facebook, grab one of your profile photos and download it into your images folder. So what I need to do to start out with then is go to my school folder, 532, HTML. Again, I'm using this 2017 folder. And I heard this earlier, uppercase or lowercase. Always use lowercase, right? So new images, and I've downloaded my face, put that in my images folder, right? And you guys can then, to get the grid file, see this right here, download background 960. If you just click on it, it's going to open like this, and you're going to say to yourself, where is it? Okay, don't do that. Instead, right click, save it in your images folder. Okay, I've already downloaded it to my desktop here, because earlier I had it open up in Photoshop. And you can kind of see the grid lines in there. I made this more contrasty, so hopefully you can see the columns. If I save that, save as, let me just make sure I have it in the right. Great. Save as a PNG, already exists, replace. Okay, quit Photoshop. Illustrator. So what I want to do then is I need to load that image as a background file. Okay? So I want to basically have a repeating background that only repeats Y on the Y-axis, not on the X-axis, okay? So what I'm going to do is go in here, body. We already have font family, Helvetica, etc. So now what I want to do is say background. URL. Braces like that. And now I can browse to my images folder in Dreamweaver and find my background 960 PNG. I cheated, I know. Right? But basically, if my index folder is right here, and I want to point to this images folder to this background 960 PNG file, I need to use the relative path of go look in the images folder for BG960 PNG. Don't forget your ending semicolon. We save that, and now if I go and look at it on my site and I refresh, why is it not there? Good job. These are the tricks that I do on you guys on purpose to see if you can figure things out. But you guys are master's degree students, so you guys figure things out pretty easily. So what I'm going to do is this images folder here, I am going to select that and put all those files to the server so that now if I refresh, yay, you can see that on the projector, right? That's horrendous. True? So remember that I wanted 12 across. What's going on here? Why do I have a bazillion across? Well, by default, a background image will repeat. Okay? It'll repeat both X and Y, right? So those of you at home, X would be across, Y would be vertical. So we need to then say, we only want this to repeat Y. So now that we do that, and we refresh, now we can see that it is no longer repeating all the way across the screen. It's starting from the left-hand corner and repeating straight down vertically. Again, if you look at this background file, I think it's only like 1 pixel tall. And so it repeats vertically and just makes up the stripes. Now, one thing I should mention right now, keep on stepping on my shoelaces. Give me a second here. So right now, you can see that the type does not sit all the way to the edge of the browser screen. Something else that we didn't do last week that we should do, and that's this. I need to reset 2 properties, margin and padding. In other words, when we are in different browsers, Firefox, Chrome, Internet Explorer, does Internet Explorer even exist anymore, or is it just Edge now? It's just Edge, isn't it, with the new version?
But nobody uses it.
They're smart. Sorry, I was in a class one time here when I was in the HCDE program. The instructor was a Microsoft employee, and about half of the students in the class were also Microsoft employees. I felt like I was in a Microsoft employee support group because they would all start talking and bitching about Microsoft with each other. It was really interesting. It was a interesting look inside of the company from an outside. Yeah. Anybody work here for Microsoft? You do? So sorry if I insult Internet Explorer, right? But every time I've sent them invoices about the extra work, they've never paid them. So, I mean, right? So what we need to do to reset, we are going to use the star selector. The star selector means every last element on the page. And we then are going to reset margins. I'm going to do that over and over and over again. Margin 0, padding 0. Okay. So now that we've done that reset, and we go and we refresh this, you will notice, oh man, look at that. Our type looks horrible. What happened? Well, a couple of properties that we didn't do last week that we should get to right now is setting margins and paddings on type. Okay, so we're going to rewind a little bit, go back to our p tags. And if we're going to say, well, let's actually go to our H1, H2, H3 tags. I am then going to say on each one of these, margin bottom 4 pixels. I'm also going to say padding top 2 pixels. So if we are setting type effectively, okay, we need to give space after, space before. Margin bottom on my p tags, I'm going to say 10 pixels. I'm just using my standard settings that I typically use. As well on my UL tags. I don't have any setting for a UL tag here. I'm going to say UL, comma, OL. Margin bottom 10 pixels. And then I didn't declare any list item tags. I'm going to say list item font size. Really annoying. Font size 16 pixels and line height 24 pixels. Okay. We go to a lecture out of my type class real quick. When we are setting type, we typically want to use some kind of a column, right? So this is where the column that I'm using for my type is 620 pixels wide, according to the 960 grid that I showed you guys earlier. So if I go to the 960 grid, this 620 mark right there is the column width that I use for my type. Now, in order to have readable type on your website, you should have no more than 80 characters per line across. Here's what I mean. Let me show you my most favorite ironic thing in the world. If we Google readability on Wikipedia, and we set this to their default. Does anybody know what's going on in the world? How readable is this text? Right. Why? Too many characters per line. By the time I get over here, if I have to go down to this next line, the likelihood of me going blah, blah, average, poor, holy shit, what line am I on, is very, very high. If it was set like this is much more readable. Now, it's a bit small on the screen, but, you know, overall, in terms of column size, point size, and leading, it's relatively readable. So, because then, in the 960 grid, I'm using a 620 pixel column. In order to, within that 620 pixel column, not go over 80 characters per line, the smallest type size I will use is 16 pixels. 16 pixels also looks very good when you are on your mobile phone. So I have a tendency to set my body copy at 16/24. The other principle here is leading or line height. So this makes a 2/3, right? In other words, if this was 21 pixel type, the leading would be 28, right? So break it down to a 1/150 or 2/3, okay? Is the ratio that, talking about ratios, is the ratio that I use for readability. Lastly, to get these paragraphs to sit away from each other, in other words, to know where one paragraph ends and one paragraph starts, if I don't have a margin bottom on these paragraphs, I'm not going to know where one paragraph starts and ends, because nowadays we don't tab things over anymore. Even when you guys are writing for print, you guys tab things over in your paragraphs?
I do, but I feel stupid doing it.
Right? You feel old school, don't you? Right? So this is well, we do things differently now for an electronic medium, and our new standard, instead of tabbing the paragraph over, is to have space after on a paragraph. Okay? And I believe that came from, well, when the web first started out, you didn't have cascading style sheets. There is a property to tab over first line, but that didn't exist when the web first started out. So the convention was put a BR tag, a break tag between paragraphs, and that'll give you the extra space, right? So that principle then, if we go to the anatomy of setting type, is space before and space after, okay? So here for this headline, I have space before. I got it backwards when I typed it out. I have space before and space after, so that that headline is enough away from the preceding paragraph and a little bit away from the next paragraph in line, but it's still associated with paragraph or the next paragraph after. So if I go back here and say padding top, margin bottom, I think that's good enough, right? Let's say it like this. Let's say I did margin top 2 pixels and margin bottom 4 pixels, okay? And then let's just say that you don't have to do this, but just bear with me for a second for demo purposes. If I say border 1 pixel, solid, magenta, This is how sometimes I take a look at stuff in space. Border, 1 pixel, solid, magenta. If I go here, right, you can see that after each paragraph, there is a 10 pixel space to the, so look at the 2 paragraphs under header level 2, right? 10 pixel space, 10 pixel space after, then the next header level 3. Well, what if I want to take that next header level 3 and push it a little farther away from the preceding paragraph? So let's say I said margin top 10. And I also on, let's give the UL tags as well, that magenta. Did the headers move another 10 pixels down? No. Why? Has anybody ever heard of collapsing margins? It is the bane of my existence. In other words, if I have a margin bottom of 10 pixels and then a margin top of 10 pixels, collapsing margin says, collapse that one. It's the most annoying thing ever. So to get that space before, I said padding top, right? Then take a look at the space inside the pink lines, right? That'll sit it away, okay? So what I'm kind of explaining to you is how the box model works as well, okay? So let's take a look at what the box model is. Let's see, so anatomy, I can close that tab. Close that tab. Internal, I can close that tab. Using images, we still haven't used the image tag, we'll leave that open. Box model. Here's what the box model is, right? We have a border. On the outside of the border, we call that margins. On the inside of the border, we call that padding. Then we have our content, okay? So what happened is if I gave it padding, it's giving space inside the element. If I'm saying margin, it's giving space outside the element, okay? Does that make sense? All right, so that's the box model. The box model is going to be very important here down the road as we start laying out our page. Okay, so I am going to now get rid of border 1 pixel, border 1 pixel, border 1 pixel, solid magenta. Okay. And the next thing I wanted to do was, instead of having my background start top left and repeat all the way across or all the way down, I want this to be in the center because I want to make a center design web page. So I can then say background position. And I can say bottom, center, top, right, left, etc. I can even say pixels, right? How I want it to move, top, left, or right. I am just going to say for right now, center. So basically, if I said center, and then I turned this repeat to no repeat, see what's going to happen. Well, it's in there, it's in the center. But because it's only 1 pixel tall, you're not really seeing it, especially on this projector, right? So it is then going to sit right smack dab, Y center, X center, and then if I say repeat Y, it is then going to repeat from that center, okay? So now, is this making sense to you? Now what we want to do is we want to, for readability, for one, we want to contain that text. But more importantly, we want to contain our major elements because we may do different things with our major elements. Meaning, let's just go take a look at the HCD website and deconstruct it real quick. We inspect it. There's the header element. Here is the navigation element. There is the content top element. Here is the, scroll down a bit. Here is the main content element. Doesn't have anything in it. Home page. Footer. So basically, the way I see how websites are broken out, they can go down a mile long, right? You see websites now that you were talking about the one-page websites, right? Where you have a section for, I don't know, one section, and then another section, and then another section, and then another section, and you navigate to each one of those sections. All those are elements one after another down the page, okay? Now, you may have elements that take up from here to there. So a fixed width, if you will, right? Or what now we're calling a max width in the responsive world. It goes out until a max width of whatever. Our max width is going to be 980, okay? But then there are also things like, well, what about the footer that has a color that goes all the way out to the edge? Let's talk about that. So what I want to do is, for right now, so kind of what I'm saying is, I've been using this build right here, this basic build for, before I had children, right, let's say it like that. I have not met a website that will not work with this thing. Meaning, some people will put a wrapper around the outside, especially if you look in the Ducket book, right? It'll tell you to put a wrapper around the outside. I disagree with that layout methodology in the Ducket book, right? Let's see if I can find it real quick. See what I'm saying? Does everybody see what I'm showing you guys? It's not indexed by Google, let's put it that way. Layout 428. This one right here. You can see that it has the header element, the content element, the sidebar element, the footer element. And then you see it has a container for page. This, I feel like, is a very old layout because, well, what if I want the page element to go all the way 100% out? Then the column of content will go all the way out to the left, and the column of sidebar will go all the way out to the right. So I need to contain them. You may have heard the term container or wrapper for an element, right? So what that means to me is I would need to contain, it'll make more sense in a bit, I would need to contain these two elements that are sitting side by side because they're floated, okay? So instead, the build that I do, let's start it. So here we go. Type with me, everybody. So if you have, did you guys already put begin header around your H1? Yeah? Okay, good. You guys are fast. Master's degree students. It's awesome. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to use div tags. Okay? Div ID header. Ending div tag. So now I have my header element. Let's make sure that my labels are correct according to my lecture, because one year I got my labels wrong and it screwed everybody up. So let's follow what I have written out here. I'm going to put in a navigation element that's not going to have anything in it, but let's put it in there anyway. In navigation, div ID navigation. For right now, I'm just going to throw in a nav tag that says nav goes here. We'll get to that in a bit. Closing div. Navigation. In contents using the Think Aloud protocol. It's an HCDE joke. Thank you. Contents. I'm going to go down to the end here. Closing div. And contents. And now I put a div tag around here. If you notice, this automatically tabbed over as I was writing it. For good practice, I would tab things over when they're nested within each other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of this content here inside my content div element and tab it over. Okay. And then again, footer. Footer.
Ask you a question, just stylistically about it here.
Sure.
How come you're using this labeled footer nav, et cetera, where instead of using the HTML5 nav and footer thing?
Let's go address that. Using images, we still want that up. Box model, margins, let's keep that up still. Page layout. So we could do it like this. HTML5 document section elements. We have a header element. We have a nav element. We have an article element. We have an aside element. We also have a main element and a footer element. Do you want to know the truth? Stupid. I felt dumb saying header ID header, footer ID footer. Because here's the thing. I could call out the header and the footer tag, right, as elements. However, you can have multiple header tags and multiple footer tags. You can have a block. In other words, if we looked at this demo right here, if we looked at each one of these feed elements, right, each one of those could have their own header and footer elements. That's proper semantic markup, right? So then what am I left with? I'm left with having to label my main header. So do I say header class main? Header ID header? I honestly just ran into that and felt really stupid and just decided, you know what? Fuck it, I'm gonna stick with divs. You know why? Because they're dividing the page. Division elements, I'm dividing the page. You'll get people that'll argue with me. Oh, you shouldn't do that, Mike. Well, it works and my SEO is through the roof, so you tell me what I'm doing wrong, is my answer, right? You Google logo design Seattle, and you see where I am for those keywords, and your SEO bullshit arguments are out the window. Because I've had that. Oh, SEO. Yeah, right. I have. Anyway, sorry, I cuss a lot when I get excited. But that's basically my argument. So if you know, I have students at Central that feel really comfortable using the HTML5 elements because that's the way they learned it. And great, knock yourself out. You know, again, each company will have their own way of doing things. Each designer and developer will have their own way of doing things. Who's right and who's wrong? Well, there are pros and cons for everything, you know? So yeah, basically what I'm saying is if you want to use the header elements and use an ID of header, great. If you want to say header class main, footer class main, and set it up as a contextual selector, header dot main to call it out, great, call it out like that. As long as you're consistent with yourself and you understand what's going on, that's basically, yeah. So that gives you a pretty good answer, I think. I just felt dumb when I was doing it. Header ID header, that sounds stupid. Oh, I hear the internet arguing with me right now. Going back here to footer, then I am then going to close out the div tag, say, and footer. And then inside here, I'm going to do a p tag. And I'm going to say, ooh, character entities. We haven't talked about character entities. And I was supposed to last week. Let's say you need a copyright symbol. You know as well as I do, if you're on a Mac and you hit Option G, that's your copyright symbol. Who knows that? Who did I just teach something new to? Doesn't work on a PC, okay? That doesn't work in the world of HTML. Instead, we have what are called character entities. So if we start by typing an ampersand, you will notice if we start scrolling through here, here's the character entity for an @ symbol. So COP, character entity, ampersand, copy, semicolon, that is now the copyright symbol. Okay? So if you need any special characters, like a copyright symbol, even like a, let's say it like this. This right here, this apostrophe should be, what is it? Can't remember it off the top of my head. Let's look it up. Apostrophe character. Character entity reference chart. Okay, so each one of these character entities, each one of these can be represented by the code of a character entity. That sounded really dumb, but you know what I'm talking about. Where's the apostrophe? Where's the apostrophe? There it is. It was APOS. Ampersand a piece of shit. There we go. That's a character entity for that. Anyway, copyright 2017, and paragraph tag shifted over. Now that I've done that, and we go and we take a look at our page again, it looks like nothing has happened. Absolutely nothing has happened, okay? But now this is where we are going to start to give that max width type or that width to our elements. So to see things in space, what I'm going to do is I am now going to call out my ID sections in my style sheet. So how we call out IDs is with the hashtag or pound sign, whatever you want to call it, right? So if we say header border 1 pixel solid black, and spell black right. Good. Right. So if we do that now, we now have a border, black border around our header so we can see it in space. So let's say then that I wanted it to be 980 pixels wide because that's the grid I'm using. Width. (980 pixels). Right? So now it's 980 pixels, but it's still over to the left. I want to center it. Do not use text align center. That will not work. Instead, what we're going to do is we are going to say margin 0 auto. Okay? So let's talk about how we can call out style sheets. So things like borders and margins and padding, right? If you see here, we have properties for margin dash top, margin dash right, margin dash bottom, margin dash left. Notice how I wrote it out. Margin 0 auto 0 auto. So I'm using shorthand, much like when I'm saying border 1 pixel solid in a color. That's shorthand, right? For border width, border style, border color. So it's still written the same, top, right, bottom, left, or you can remember it as trouble, okay? So if we see it like this, top, right, bottom, left. If I see it written like this, top, right, bottom, left. If I see it written like I did above, here, margin 0, that means top, right, bottom, left, shorthand, 0 all the way around. So to get things to sit in the center of the page, it is common to use margin right and margin left auto. So what that means then is, if I save that and I go back here, right? As this kind of contracts and expands, right? The window, it's saying auto over here and auto over there, thereby getting it to sit in the center, okay? Now let's also talk about the downfall of the box model. If I wanted to, let's say, give it a margin on the outside, like margin bottom, 20 pixels, let's just say. You can see stuff moves down and the width doesn't change, okay? Likewise, I'm gonna get rid of that. If I said margin left, 20 pixels. Ooh, look at that. That totally shifted things over. Oh, that's right, because it got rid of that auto margin. It's no longer sitting in the center. Let's get rid of that. Let's say padding. Let's say padding top, 20 pixels. So because we've given space inside the element and we never declared a height, the text element inside that element basically pushes the height down, right? In other words, we don't have a specific height that that element is. That element occupies height or space on the page because of the containing elements and the containing measurements inside. So let's say that we did something similar, and instead of saying padding top 20 pixels, we said padding, and if we use shorthand, right? And we said top 0, left 20, bottom 0, right 20. See, I have problems with remembering the trouble. Top 0, right 20, bottom 0, left 20. Let's see what happens. We refresh. What did it do? How wide is this element now? 1020. So here's what happened. Because we added space inside, what it did is it has a fixed width of 980. Well, I added space inside 20 and 20, so it's 980 plus 20 plus 20. Okay? So what we have to do is if we want this element to hit the 980 mark, right? We have to take the 20 left and right out of the width. So if we said width 940, it's now back, and take a look at the position of the text. The text is now, so you see there's padding. So the element has a visual width of 980. Okay? So I will use the term visual width. Plus padding, so the actual width is 940 plus 20 visual width 980. So it then puts the padding on the inside and adds it to the measurements. So now the M in Mike is directly lined up on our grid, because what we want to achieve right now, it's going to be important that we use the grid to line things up as we're going through stuff. Now, anybody ever heard of Bootstrap? Okay. Bootstrap has turned the box model around on its head. So visualize this, if you will. Let's say you had an image that was a certain width, and you added padding and a border to it. So let's say that image is, I don't know, 600 pixels wide, and you added 4 pixels of padding on each side, and then a border, you've added 5 to the overall width. Now let's say you want that image to be responsive, right? And we'll talk about this down the road when we get to responsiveness. If you say max width 100%, it's going to be max width 100% plus 5 pixels plus 5 pixels, so it's going to overflow outside of the widths. So Bootstrap, when they came along, they then changed the box model to box sizing border box. So if I changed the box sizing to box sizing border box, and I went back here and I refreshed, now take a look at what happened. It's not taking the padding and adding it to the width anymore. So for now, I am going to stick with the default box model, right? Because if we're not using a framework like Bootstrap, let's just use the default box model. However, when it then comes to images and being responsive, we'll use the Bootstrap box model for images only, right? Does that make sense? Okay. So I'm going to go back and get rid of that. All right, so what I want you guys to do then is all of your other elements, navigation, content, footer, add the same thing. Width 940, margin 0, auto, padding 020. Okay? Border black. Navigation. Right. And now, because I've already written this once and I want to use the same information, yeah, it's cheating a little bit, but I wrote it myself the first time, right? Here's what I'm saying. Have any of you seen the book cover for copying and pasting on Stack Overflow? Look it up. It's funny. Have you seen that one, Thomas? Yeah. So now that we have those measurements, let's go and let's preview. Now we have all our elements stacking in line, right? So let's say you want to add more, like you were saying, the parallax scrolling one-page stuff, right? Let's say you want to add more vertical elements in between here. right? You could just go and add div elements and then say, give it a width, then margin right and left auto to get it to sit in the center, and just keep on doing that. Now, let's say that you wanted a navigation schema like the HCDE site, where you have a colored band that goes all the way out to the edges. Easy. This is where, in our navigation, we could possibly use a class, right? Because if we're going to do the same thing to footer and navigation, we could use a class. Or I'm just going to keep on going with the ID. And I'm going to say navigation container. Right? And I'm going to tab that over, right? So I have a navigation container and an inside navigation. If I go back up to my navigation, right? And I have that black. And I say navigation container. I spell it right. And I say background color black. Here's what happens. So I have one element surrounding another element. The container element, if you will, right? Containers can come in all shapes and sizes, and we'll talk about how we're going to turn our content element into a container as well. But let's say I wanted to do a design, like I said, that had the navigation go all the way out, while having the text inside of it still stay fixed in the center. Well, if I now go and say in my navigation here, and I say color white, which is going to now change the color of that text to white, my nav, because it's 980 wide and has padding, or excuse me, 940 wide, padding 2020, so it's a visual width of 980, right? That element is going to stay in the center. But then the wrap is going to go all the way out to the edges, because inherently block level elements go 100%, right? So that's the definition of block level elements. Inline level elements do not. Inline level elements go out as wide as they are, right? In other words, I have an emphasis tag inside the paragraph tag. Well, that emphasis tag is only as wide as the text inside. Does that make sense? So that's a good way of saying, you know, those two things. So likewise, I could go and do the same thing around my footer. Div ID footer container go up here and say footer container, background, color, black, footer, color, white. So the property of color means textual elements only. So now here is the start of my newer, more modern design, right? Using the same old build from before my kids were born, right? All right, the next thing we want to do is we want to have in our content area 2 columns. This is where inside here now I'm going to say begin text. Make sure I'm using the correct labels. Yep. ID of text, an ID of sidebar. Div ID text. See again, here I'm playing the what's the ending div tag game. End text. Right? And again, because this text element now is inside the content element, I want to make sure that it's tabbed over. And then everything inside that right there is tabbed over, right? So it should look like that. Text, text. Next, I want to make a sidebar that's going to have sub-navigation items in it. And if you want to use the HTML5 elements, what was your name again? Nick? For your text, you would use the article HTML5 element. For the sidebar, you would use aside. Those are the semantically correct ones. Again, sidebar. Oops. Div ID. Sidebar. Closing div tag. And sidebar. Yeah. I can. You want me to show you in code or a visual representation? Code. So, content is our main content area. Let me show you what we're going to do here. Let me say it like this. What we're going to do then is we are going to have a text area and a sidebar area inside of our content div tag. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
2 boxes.
Yeah, 2 columns with, yeah. And so we're getting to run out of time here. So the last thing that I want you to do for today, and we'll pick it up next week, is to do this. Put a headline and list items inside your sidebar. So let's do H2 and say headline, actually say page headline, because that is going to change down the road given the page we're on later on. And we're going to say UL, closing UL. And in here, we're going to do a list item. And we are going to, I don't know, just make some sub-navigation items. Old lorem ipsum. Okay. So now that we save that, right, if we go and preview, what we should have then is our text element here, right, and our sidebar element down below it. Okay, so why don't we lastly, no, we don't need to put a border around it. Let's do this to end the day. These are going to get on my nerves. The ones, the bullets and stuff outside. So let's go and give our ULOL padding top and bottom 0, padding left and right 20 pixels. Because default list items, numbers and bullets, place the numbers and bullets outside of the element. There is a setting where we can change it to be inside of the element. I've run into snafu the outside of the element and just pad it over. But then what will happen here is that we'll have to change that to, well, let's just do it right now. We're going to want our list item in our navigation to look a little bit different. So for now, let's put instead of this right here on the master ULOL, let's get rid of that and say contextually, contextual selector text OL text UL. So what we're doing now is we're writing multiple selectors and we're going to give only the ordered list and unordered list items inside the text area, meaning our written content, those settings. And therefore we can give settings to the navigation and to the sidebar that are different if we need to. Make sense? So you can see here that these ones are indented, these ones aren't, and we'll take care of that down the road. So what we have to do next week is we need to make our text and our sidebar into 2 columns, and then we need to create a navigational schema and show you how to do that. So next week, we're going to talk about floats and clears, and we are going to talk about using display inline and display block. So there's 2 ways of making things sit next to each other. One is to float stuff. Another is to change it from a block level element to an inline level element. So we're going to explore those two options next week. So this seems to be a pretty good stopping place for this week. Have y'all guys followed along? Is this starting to, are you starting to kind of say to yourself, oh, okay, it's not that hard. Look at that, right? I got one smile back there. That's a good sign, right? Okay, so I'm going to shut down the recording for today and we'll pick up next week.